Hi, Roy here on my channel Roy Reads Anything, where I talk about old books that are strange or interesting or just weird. And been thinking about the phenomenon of the super criminal. So I was reading Bulldog Drummond by Sapper, a thriller that came out in 1920, and came across the term super criminal, which made me think. And I know we tend to say supervillain these days, but just as an idea, I wondered, how 1920 seems quite early to have the super criminal. So I did a bit of a digging around in newspaper archives and Google Books and places like that to try and plot when that term super criminal was in use. And it does seem to be a 20th century phenomenon. Okay, so hardly crops up at all in the 19th century, and then it sort of creeps in the basically in the 1910s and onwards. So super criminal. One thing I found was a cartoon from the Bioscope, which was a cinema magazine. I think it might have been like a trade paper for the cinema, quite a new thing then. Had a cartoon of the super criminal, um, I think in a series of like types of characters you see in films. So this is 1916, and the super criminal is already a sort of a trope. And you see this guy with a bowler hat, not a bowler hat, a top hat, domino mask, cloak, in the process of pressing a button to operate a trapdoor that plunges a detective out of the room, and interestingly, wearing skin tight clothes, a bit like the sort of super characters of comics much later. So there was a super criminal, already a sort of recognizable type at the pictures anyway. Kind of reminded me a bit of villains from the stage, the melodramas of the 19th century had sort of been transformed and kind of made more super by that point. Anyway, yes, so in Bulldog Drummond, it's a term that makes sense. And other super criminals referred to in things like articles and reviews, well, one of them is Fu-Manchu. So there's quite a lot of references in reviews of Sax Rohmer's. It's either called The Mystery of Dr. Fu Manchu, or this edition, I think, is the American edition, The Insidious Dr. Fu Manchu. Um, Reviews of that would apply super criminal to this guy as well. So, the rise of the super criminals. Rewinding a bit, what are these books and why was I reading them? So, why was I reading them? They are the choices for May of Edgar's Resurrectionist Book Club, as mediated into our reality by Sean D. Standfast. So this is about works by dead authors, long dead, safely dead, more than 50 years, pre-war authors. And Sax Rohmer's first Fu Manchu book, Sapper's first Bulldog Drummond book were the picks. So an interesting pairing, because what we have are two examples of how thriller writers in the early 20th century were conjuring up menaces that would appeal to their readers, both in terms of that's scary, but also the reassurance of them being like defeated at least for one episode. So Fu Manchu, Sax Rohmer's character, basically this started life as magazine stories, then was put together as a book, was immensely popular, and I do have to be careful. There's lots of things I assume everybody knows. In fact, I assume most people know more than I do, and I'm the one that's just catching up. So sometimes I don't explain obvious basic things that need to make sense of what on earth I'm talking about. So it's a book printed on paper, using ink, and what it's telling us about is Fu Manchu is this kind of evil genius from China, and his program is to uh, murder loads of English guys who are like who will be aware of the threat posed by China to kind of destroy the West, or the white race, as it often says. So, in terms of what the menace is, it's the title guy, really. Fu Manchu, he's he almost seems occult, the things that happen are kind of uncanny, and yet it's all sort of science based. And he sort of appears and disappears from various hideouts, the elaborate murders. To be honest, he could succeed if he stopped trying to be so elaborate and just killed people. It doesn't need a rare scorpion
Just shoot the
or a
buggers,
trained
man.
marmoset, but hey, where's the fun in that? So using
Really?
various creatures or biological agents or drugs. There are these elaborate murder plots that are some some succeed, some don't, and the adversaries. There's Nayland Smith, who's a he's spent a lot of time in Burma. Now he's back. He's got this roving commission that seems to give him power over the police, etc. But at the same time, he seems to be like the only person who's engaged in this sort of defend the country against the threat. Then he has a kind of Dr. Petrie narrating the book, who becomes the come gets caught up in the slipstream of it. So that's the basic setup. You've got the foreign invader infiltrating the country, and these kind of and there's captivity and escape and that kind of thing. All scenes of drugs as well. There's lots of as well as the sort of obligatory opium den scenes, because obviously that's part of the kind of reflection of the sort of Chinese
Yellow
evil,
peril.
yeah, the yellow
Yellow
what
peril.
gets called the yellow peril, um, sort of thing. But also there's like I thought quite well described um, kind of hashish bender effects happen, lots of stuff like that. So that's what that was all about. And this was a pre First World War thing, and first of a long series. And of course, the character has been used in lots of other ways. When I was a teenager, Shang-Chi, the master of kung fu, was the son of Fu Manchu. That was the story, and that's kind of been written out partly because of Marvel let the license lapse, and in the recent movie, it's not Fu Manchu, it's not his father, although there is one sliver of an Easter egg in the dialogue that could lead you to believe that the movie dad of Shang-Chi had a sort of he was mythologized in the past as Fu Manchu. You could read it that way. Anyway, no one on earth cares about any of this.
No.
So yes, Fu Manchu. But then 1920, Sapper, aka Herman McNeil, who wrote the first of his Bulldog Drummond thrillers. So these are named after the hero, who has been, is a young decommissioned officer who's fought in the First World War in France, and is back in the UK looking for adventure. He advertises for adventure and gets caught up in a plot where the beautiful Phyllis, her dad, is being blackmailed, and it sounds pretty straightforward, but it turns out there is a super criminal, Carl Peterson, and his equally evil associates have this massive plot. So the threat here, so there is this kind of it's the threat to Britain of this massive thing. So the threat this time is not China, it's socialism. or to be more precise, it's syndicalism. So the idea is that a massive communist style insurrection will be coordinated, that will take over the country and kind of destroy the country. But it's all kind of a trick because it's Peterson doing it for the money, really, and he's manipulating the socialists. So the threat, as with Fu Manchu, is kind of embodied into one individual. Um, so again, what type of hero does it take? Drummond is, as well as having prodigious strength and being kind of the archetypal clubland hero. The Junior Sports Club, I think, is the club where he and his associates hang out, who are fairly indistinguishable from each other. Load of kind of similar kind of ex-officer sort of independent young men of independent means. The only difference I can tell between them is that Algie Longworth wears a monocle that he doesn't really need. Um, I found this an easier read. I've read it before actually. Breezy, full of action. But again, interesting, the super criminal idea. This idea that there's this kind of menace that is kind of almost invisible, um, and that's defeated by the sort of upright Brit. Interesting. Nayland Smith, um, often described how his skin is burned brown by the sun, so he understands how the sort of the colonies work because he's been there and he can use that knowledge. All the fools around him who don't unperceive the threat, he can use that knowledge to defeat Fu Manchu, who always escapes. Carl Peterson escapes as well, at least in this. There are other books. That's not really a spoiler. There are collections called Bulldog Drummond's Four Rounds with Carl Peterson, so you kind of get the sense that this isn't the end. Um, yeah, so I thought similarities between Carl Peterson and Fu Manchu. Well, again, they both have, as well as their kind of the way they sort of threaten the nation. Um, they both have evil menageries. Particularly Fu
That's
Manchu, who's that's part of his science, is cultivating these strange creatures. But Carl Peterson has, I think, a snake and a gorilla are deployed in anger, as well as these kind of also kind of almost tribal people who are like acolytes who become assassins, that sort of thing.
no
Um,
marmosets.
which there's no marmosets in Bulldog Drummond yet.
You said. You
You,
said.
no, the marmosets in Fu
Oh,
Manchu.
sorry, ducks.
God.
Oh, I can't.
um, Reminded me of Dracula. If you go backwards into the late 1890s, again with Dracula, you've got the threat from overseas depicted as a kind of contagion. So Fu Manchu in particular is like often figured as being part of this force that's like a sort of almost like a disease that's going to infiltrate the the, the world. Um, Dracula again, animals at his command, can't be killed, uses secret hideouts. The adversaries are the only ones who really know what the threat's all about and take him seriously. So yeah, and then moving forwards, Bond villains, again, they're sort of super criminals. Pretty obvious to see sort of Doctor No being a Fu Manchu type character, and Bond being a Bulldog Drummond type character. Although these seem in some ways quite innocent compared to the Bond books. There's romance in this, but it's incredibly chaste compared to um, James Bond's boudoir antics. Um, but I think partly the point of view of this character, who you might not really want to have as a friend, But you'd quite like to have, their life whizzing around the countryside in high-speed motor cars, smoking cigarettes all the time, quaffing tankards of ale. It has a sort of enjoyability, I suppose, about the Bulldog Drummond's world. You don't really get with Nayland Smith because he's so driven. All he does is smoke a cracked briar, which he never cleans. I know. Yes, doesn't sound.
Vile.
Sounds like pretty hardcore tobacco use.
Even at my height of pipe smoking, I wouldn't have done that.
Yes, well, exactly. So, yes, a really interesting pairing of books. Like I said, showing a bit how thrillers were sort of bringing to life these threats as they were then, just as now. You could. I'm sure I could walk into Waterstones and find loads of books where the anxieties about things like climate change or artificial intelligence are kind of driving some sort of thriller plot, and then the reassurance they can somehow be defeated. Thanks for watching, everybody. Back again sometime if the country survives, and see you soon.